and I don't know, it says a grudge match. I think we all get along fairly well, so I'm not sure it's going to be a lot of a grudge match. Oh, okay. Brent says, yeah, it could be. So, okay, good. So that's good, because a little spice in the show will help our ratings when we're going against all the other 120 different programs going on. So I'm just going to go around the panel and have each of the panel members introduce themselves a little bit, tell us their background and what kind of crime they're writing, and then we'll come back and circle around for some questions. Melody, would you like to start?
Okay, I'm Melody Campbell. I'm the author of the Goddaughter Mob Caper series, which is a humorous series. It's won 3 awards. I have a total of 16 books published, over 50 short stories, mainly crime, but also some fantasy in there, and they've won another 7 awards. I'm the former executive director of Crime Writers of Canada. I've taught fiction writing at Sheridan College since 1992, and when you look at that, you think, I should be richer. I should be. Anyways, that's it about me. Dwayne?
Hi, Jane. Yep, we're just introducing each other.
You were muted there for a bit, Dwayne.
Yeah, okay, yeah. Thanks. Jane, we're going around round table and introducing ourselves, so would you like to introduce yourself to the audience?
All right, I'm Jane Barnard, J.E. Barnard. I write crime like everybody else, but like Melody, I'm not rich either. I write currently the Falls Mysteries, women's wilderness suspense novels set basically west of Calgary in the foothills of Alberta, and all the way from Bragg Creek to Cochrane to Wyprus to points west and north.
All right, great. Brent.
Brent Nichols. I've put most of my time into writing science fiction and fantasy, but I keep writing short crime stories, and then they got to be longer stuff. And finally, I wrote a crime novel that's about to be released by Tiny Sledgehammer Press. Also, the editor of Writing Better Fiction, which is a fundraiser for the annual short story contest as well. So available wherever fine ebooks are sold, and paper copies from Amazon as well. And I'll stop shamelessly plugging my stuff. So I've written a bit of mystery and crime and some supernatural mystery stories, and then a whole bunch of stuff in unrelated genres.
All right, great. I'm DWAYNE CLAYDEN. I was a police officer and a paramedic for 40 years in Calgary and area, and now I write crime novels. The Brad Coulter series, there's 3 of those out. They're set in Calgary in the late 70s into the early 80s, and 2 more are well on their way, and then a new series coming out called Speargrass Opioid, and it's set in Great Falls, Montana. So that's me, and that's the panel. So what we're talking about is plot and character. We're trying to decide if there's really going to be a grudge match, but we're going to work on that. Brent says he will do his best on that. So I guess what we need to talk about is if plot versus character, what does that mean to each of us as a writer? So maybe we'll flip down to Jane to start this one off. So Jane, as a crime writer, what do you think of when we say plot?
What I think of is the series of events that happen. Strictly that. There's no nuance. There's no anything. Plot is just piece A, piece B, piece C. The clues or the red herrings or the other elements of mystery, but those are the basic ones.
Okay, great. Brent?
So to somewhat simplify things, the mystery thriller suspense genre is a hugely rich genre, so I'm going to make wild oversimplifications. I think that plot essentially in the genre is the process of uncovering facts, the process of solving the mystery, uncovering pieces of information. So the plot is, a certain amount of plot is mandatory, and characterization on the flip side would probably be more of an exploration of why a crime was committed or why someone should not be a suspect. And I think one of the interesting things is that in a series, for instance, sometimes you'll find that the character of the detective is not interesting. It's the murderer and the victim and the suspects and their relationships that are interesting. Sometimes you can end up in a story where the protagonist is a cipher. The protagonist is not that interesting. It's all the other characters that are fascinating, that really make the story interesting. I think that to a large degree, it's, you know, which side of a dollar bill is more valuable. I think that plot and character are both essential, but at a very simple level, that's how I would view plot within the mystery genre and character within the mystery genre.
Okay, perfect. Melody?
Okay. In my class, I happily misquote Stephen King all the time. And,
Perfect.
and yeah, he kind of said, and maybe I'm paraphrasing, you don't have a story without plot. And we're writing stories, aren't we? So plot is what your characters do. Now, I'm going to throw an iron in the fire here, and I'm going to say that looking between plot and character and trying to decide what's more important, that's too simplistic. You have to look at what a novel is. And a novel is a character with a problem or goal and obstacles to that goal. So how can you separate the two? And that's my stance, and I'm hoping you'll argue it.
Well,
right.
I think that wraps up the whole panel right about there.
Yeah, so thanks for being on the show.
I've got 2 more pages here.
Oh, okay. Melody has more stuff.
Who's a prof? Yeah.
Yeah, well, I mean, I agree that you can't have one without the other. And certainly for me, writing the crimes, I definitely need a high crime. Mine are more towards the thriller side than towards the detective side. So I'm looking for something that's going to keep it fast paced. But as Melody pointed out, I need somebody to be in that fast paced environment, that fast paced event. And for that event to maybe pound on them a little bit, make life tough for them. So, you know, the adage, say no to your protagonist. And I do that a lot in mine. So, yeah, so we definitely need both. I think there are some crime series, especially the British ones, that I think they're really so character driven. So I'm leading into the character side now, that are so character driven that sometimes I even forget what the plot really was. I know there was a crime committed. I know they solved it, but I was so absorbed in the characters and what was happening with them that's what I remember most. So maybe Melody, do you want to pick up from there?
Sure. Okay. People would look at my Goddaughter series, and I know I've been told that, you know, they're probably more plot driven. I would argue, again, I like arguing, I'm Italian. I would argue that all series books are plot driven after the first book. In the first book, of course, we develop a character, we have a character arc, but then that's over usually by the end of the first book. So then we have to start thinking of new stories. So I would defy anybody to say that my favorite character, Nico, in my book isn't a well-drawn character, even though people do consider that I'm famous. Very smally famous for my plots. When we talk character in a crime novel, I think what's really important is motivation. And this is something you touched on, DWAYNE, and that I think is essential and that so many new writers don't seem to grasp, is why is your character doing what they're doing? Why are they risking their lives to solve a mystery? There has to be motivation for them to do it, as well motivation for the villain. Why is he doing this? What is worth it to him? And you've got to be able to show us that that is important. So that's my take on character.
All right, Jane.
Well, you just said something that struck a chord for me. And although I write character-driven as opposed to Melody, whose books are considered more plot-driven, 2 things. First, I really love Melody's characters in the Goddaughter series.
Oh, thank you.
They are my ultimate go-to for times when you just want to laugh out loud at how crazy families can get. And second, part of the plot, and I'm going to argue the plot side here for a second. Part of any good plot is that black moment. Yes, like Brent said, you have to say no to your characters. You have to put some obstacles in their path. But one of the critical elements that I find I look for in crime novels is, where have I pushed that character? What plot point is the point of no return, where everything is so terrible and it looks like if they don't die, they're certainly never going to solve the case and there are going to be awful consequences. That, to me, is both a plot point and a character point. And any novel where you drive your character to the very edge of reason and safety and sanity is both a critical plot point and a critical character point. So
Good.
And drives your reader to near insanity
Yeah.
at the same time.
you
Brent?
hope, yes.
I use typos and non sequiturs to drive my readers to the edge of insanity.
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah, certainly plot and character are like, I'll just recycle my metaphor of a couple of minutes ago and say which side of a dollar bill is more valuable. They're utterly fundamental and intertwined, so very difficult to separate. You can put books on a continuum and say this one is comparatively more plot driven and this one is comparatively more character driven, but a good book is going to have very large amounts of both. So I think, yeah, to a large degree, the plot is the process of finding the clues, but it can also be the process of a character going through something, the process of people being put under more and more and more pressure, and then you finally get to see what happens when the pressure is too much.
Now, I was gonna make an argument, except I'm kind of switched sides to Melodie's side, but I was actually thinking that when you're writing a series, that actually it would be more character driven. And I see where your point is, that after you've introduced your character and people understand your character, that it becomes about plot. I think with mine, the plot is definitely there and we can't separate them, but I think it's a lot about the journey for the character. And we've talked about the why people do things. And for me, I've put my main character in some pretty bad situations, and especially at the end of book 3, and I got hate mail about that. That book 4 became about how can he recover from what happened in book 3, but then that next plot comes into play again. And so he's still dealing with the effects of book 3 when another ball is dropped in his court, and he has to deal with that too. So I'm going to make the slight argument that a series becomes at least a little bit more about the character and what keeps driving them forward. Sorry. You okay with that one? Nobody's jumping them down, throwing stuff yet? We're good? Okay. So then if we look at that, what would be a other than our own, maybe, what would be a favorite character-driven novel? Maybe something that other crime readers, crime authors might recognize as character-driven. We got Brent. Thank you.
So Elizabeth George writes these fascinating mysteries where one of the recurring things that happens in her books is sometimes it starts with the murderer being arrested, but it still feels, and it really is the murderer, you find that out at the end, but it feels like a legitimate mystery because you think this is preposterous. There's no way that this person would kill this other person. There's no motive, and the real mystery is finding out what the motive is, because it starts out seeming incomprehensible. So I would say that Elizabeth George's books tend to be very, very deep examinations of character. It's finding out why this seemingly this person who seems like they would never kill this other person, why they would do it. And so it becomes very much about character, far more than it's about plot.
Okay. Jane?
I will go with somebody who actually did both exceedingly well, and that was Agatha Christie.
Yeah.
Go right to the top, I know.
Right.
You didn't specify living crime author, did you? Did I miss that?
No.
No. No
You
balance.
can't argue with the queen of mystery. But if you look at some of her books, they're very much Poirot just follows the track, uncovers the clues, and it's pretty straightforward. And then you look at some other ones. There's one on, I think, Netflix now, Ordeal by Innocence.
Yes.
And that is the absolute deepest excavation of a dysfunctional family that was probably done before the year 1991 in a crime novel. The crime has happened well before the fact. Someone has been presumed guilty. Someone else has been presumed innocent, of course. It picks up years later, and it draws you completely into this very dysfunctional family that on the surface, like Brent said, looked like everything was above board with just one bad apple. And so for Agatha Christie, I don't think Agatha Christie would have as easy a run now in crime fiction on either side as she did when she was one of the only people doing it really well in England. But I think you can't go wrong by going back to some of her books and really looking hard at, was she more plot focused on this one, or was she more character focused? We don't know much more about Poirot, through the entire oeuvre than when we started, but we know a lot about some other characters. Which brings me to one question. I'm going to throw it out there and you guys can pick it up or not. Does the detective always have to be the main character?
That is a great question.
Well, they sure aren't in mine.
Yeah, I think.
Let me think on that, and then I'll answer this question. Okay,
Sure, okay.
I haven't done this yet.
Okay.
If I was choosing character-driven, I would definitely say Daphne du Maurier. I'd say Rebecca is probably the best example I can think of. My cousin Rachel as well. They're crime books, but they're extremely character-driven. And notice that they're all standalones. And I would also put something like Gone Girl into that class. Very much a standalone book. And that's why I'm coming back to the ones that I would say are plot-driven. And I'm experiencing this in my own writing because I'm writing the 7th book of a series now. And yeah, I've got to come up with something unique that I haven't done before. So I would look to the people like, again, top of my list, and wouldn't you know it, Jane, is Agatha Christie. And I agree with you totally. She writes the best plots ever. And I always get upset when people say, yeah, but there's not a lot of characterization. And I point out other books as well of hers that there definitely is. Witness for the Prosecution, all sorts of books like that. But I would say Stephen King, Elmer Leonard, any really famous big series. We have Sue Grafton's series, definitely plot driven. Again, this can sometimes be a criticism people have of them, that Sue Grafton's protagonist doesn't change much in the books. Well, for goodness sake, she's written 25 or 26, hasn't she? How many times is she going to change? So I think there is a huge advantage if you're writing a standalone to do it more from a character-driven point of view. But if you're really working on your 7th, 8th, 9th novel, you've got to really focus in on plot.
Okay, good, Jane.
Well, I just want to pick up on Melodie's point that when you're writing a series, it really helps to know how long you've got. If your publisher says they want a one-off and then comes back and says, give me 2 more, how can you plan a character arc over more books?
Yeah.
Now, I was fortunate with the Falls Mysteries because I knew going in that I had 3 books for sure, and so I could plan a character arc over 3 books as well as individual character arcs for each book. But a lot of authors never get that opportunity.
Yeah, Jane, and it's funny because I faced exactly that. By book 5 of the Goddaughter series, I was thinking, how long is this going to go? And, I haven't got them married yet, and I haven't like kind of close that off. And if I don't do that soon and they stop the series, I'm going to get angry people at my website. I know I will, because it's happened before with another series that I did that didn't close up everything at the end. So yes, so in book 6, I made sure that if that was the last goddaughter book, everybody would be happy with the ending of that. So yes, it's something we face. We don't know how long we'll have. You know, the current book I'm writing, you know, my agent has said, I want to see a little more here. In other words, I want to know that you can go 3 books on this, but I don't know if it's going to be 3 books or 6 books. It all depends on sales.
Brent, do you have any thoughts you want to add into any of this?
It occurs to me, the example that keeps popping into my head is actually mystery series television, where you watch something like one of the versions of CSI, or you watch Law and Order, and nobody cares what the detectives are like, and there isn't enough time in an episode to explore the characters, the other characters, and so one-off sort of standalone episodes of mystery television tend to be very much about the plot. But on the other hand, you look at a season-long British crime drama, and that becomes very, very much about character. You look at something like Shetland or Broadchurch, and those are really, really deep examinations of character. So that I know we're supposed to be talking about novels, but it seems like a really clear illustration of the series, the standalone books turning into tending to be more character driven, and the series tending to be much more plot driven.
Yeah, and I agree with you on that too, Brent. The other one I like is Scott and Bailey, that was very character driven as well, and you really got to understand them. We're just gonna go to the side here for a second. We have a question from Tony King, and his question is, what comes first, plot or character? Anybody want to jump on that one right off the top?
The knife in the dark.
Yeah.
The knife in the dark. All right. It sounds like plot.
I think the short answer would be pick one. Really, it's going to depend on the writer and on the story. So it can be one, it can be the other, it can be a blend. So with my End of the Loop book, I started out with a situation and wanted to explore where that situation went. So it began as pure plot and very quickly turned into a really deep examination of character. How did this person end up in this situation and what happened? So I think that one writer will start with a plot and another writer will start with a character. I had actually intended to use Agatha Christie as an example of much more plot-driven books, because I've only read a couple, and she tends to write puzzle mysteries, and the puzzle mysteries the characters tend to be almost irrelevant to a really meticulously constructed puzzle mystery. It's all about the puzzle. I have completely forgotten where I was going with that, so I'm
Oh, that's great.
Okay, can I leap in here then? Because I one thing I really like to do is contradict myself. I just do it so well. And even though I tend to be the tell me a story. I want to hear a story from my students, not just character sketches. Even though I tend to story, I will tell you that when I was starting the Goddaughter series, I was looking, as I did in fantasy, when I was writing fantasy, I was writing humor, and I was looking for a vehicle in which I could do something humorous. So I already knew that the Bond person was taken by Janet Ivanovich, so I couldn't do that. And I was looking around, well, what could I write in which I could throw in some really funny plots? And I came up with the Mob Goddaughter, which is pretty close to home, as some of you know me. I'm Sicilian background, and some of this is a romantic love. So in that case, I started with character. And I said, okay, I will build a mob goddaughter who doesn't want to be one, but she's got an inept mob family and she keeps getting dragged back in to bail them out. I can make that funny. Okay, what's going to be my first plot? So that's how I started, actually, with character.
All right. Yeah, I think maybe it depends a little bit on where you might be in your writing career as well. When I started out with the first novel, I had this is about storytelling. I had a story I wanted to tell. It was a very important incident in Calgary police history that happened in 1974 and was referred to as Black Friday, and police officers were shot and one was killed. And that was a story I wanted to tell. I was going to fictionalize it, but I very much had that story before I even contemplated what the character would be like and how they would end up in that situation. And initially, that story was going to be the first chapter, and it ended up being 2/3 of the way in as I backtracked then and built the character. So, like, I guess what I'm saying is that situation may depend on what you have. If you have that great story you want to tell, that's where you're going to start. If you have a great idea for a character, then that may be the point you start as well. So it's individual author choice, I guess. Jane.
I want to come back to Brent's book for a second, because the reason that I wanted Brent on this panel was because I thought his book was such a tremendous deep dive into character. And I realized that he'd actually started it as plot. Now, the more you write crime, the more you see the bones of a story, and it's much harder to get completely sucked in. But I have to say that Brent's book sucked me in with the character from page one.
Great. That's awesome.
And I started the Falls Mysteries with a character, with a woman who was just out of the RCMP. And I wrote that before the lawsuit started about women in the RCMP. Mm-hmm. So the first book was based on someone that I knew personally who came out of the RCMP very different, literally almost giving me the sense of that she was an abuse survivor. And I have dealt with quite a number of abused women over the years, and I've done some outreach work for transition houses, so I recognize the signs. And at first I thought it was her marriage, but the longer she talked to me afterwards, the more she kind of decompressed from being out of the RCMP, the more I realized that she was living in an environment, working in an environment that was extremely abusive. And as she was married to another RCMP officer, mm-hmm. the work environment was the home environment, was the work environment. And I took that starting point and said, where does a woman go after that? She goes back to the last place she felt safe, or the last person she felt safe with. And so that's where they started. And the three books are essentially her, in addition to a mystery plot and other characters with their own arcs, they are this woman's decompression and healing from her years immersed in an RCMP world. And then now, of course, everybody knows that the RCMP has been an exceedingly unfriendly place for women to work.
You made us believe that, Jane, and I particularly love, as I know we talked about this before, the storyline you have with the secondary character who is not perfect physically, shall we say. And I thought that was a really good addition to it. It really made me think to see the everyday life of that, and then dealing with these extraordinary happenings on top of that. So yeah, you are one of the people I would say is character driven, but at the same time, I liked your plots. So that's where I have the trouble.
So for each of us, and maybe this has already been covered, and if it has, that's great. But when you sit down tomorrow, when you're sitting down to write your next novel, what's going to be forefront in your mind? Is it
tomorrow?
Tomorrow, he said. Okay. I'll give you till Monday morning. You can get through this weekend, but after that, you got to get back at it. So you're going to write Monday morning, and you're writing. For the sake of argument, we're going to say you're starting a new novel. Are you going to be thinking more about finding a plot, or are you going to be thinking about characters?
I've noticed So I'm just going to briefly mention what Jane said about being surprised that a very character-intensive novel started out being about plot. I wrote that book I started that book 20 years ago, and it went through a bunch of drafts, and I've changed as a writer in that time. And as a kid, as far as I was concerned, the plot was the book. The characters were incidental. I barely noticed them. It was all about what happens, what's the plot, and my tastes have changed. The other example that a lot of people might recognize of mystery stories that are primarily about plot rather than character. I grew up reading the Hardy Boys books, and the characters there are about as deep as a dime, but the plots are really solid, and they're thoroughly entertaining books. I enjoyed them hugely when I was a little fella, taller than Dwayne is now. That would be way funnier if this was a live panel.
It would. Yeah,
shorter than I am. Anyways, but my tastes have changed, and my approach to storytelling has changed. So I look at the stuff that I wrote 30 years ago, and it was very much very plot driven, and my approach has shifted much more toward examination of characters since then. I'm still very far from being any sort of literary writer. I am still extremely fond of plot, but I would say that instead of the plot being the vast majority, my plots are now simply a very significant part, as opposed to being nearly the entire story. So plot is still quite important to me with everything that I write, but character has taken a much the amount of attention that I pay to character has grown pretty much for all the time that I've been writing. So I would probably spend a significant amount of time on character when I start my next project.
Good. Melody?
Yeah, well, the book that I've just finished writing that my agent's dealing with now is actually a spin-off from the Goddaughter series, in that it's Gina Gallo. She's the protagonist of the Goddaughter series, which is present day. This is her great-grandmother. So we're going back to the 1920s. So in the first book, I do a lot of character development, an awful lot of it. And now I'm faced with the fact that, my God, I got to come up with another plot. I've already written 60 plots. Okay. I got to come up with something original that people haven't seen before. And that is, I think, the stressor I have now. And I remember being on a panel with Linwood Barclay, and one of the questions we were asked was, does it get easier as you go on, or does it get harder? And I remember Vicki Delaney said, oh, it gets easier because I know what I'm doing now. And Linwood and I both said, no, it gets harder because the expectations are there. You've already done so much. And the reader expectations are that you're going to do it even better this time. And oh my goodness, I tell you, my 61st plot, my 61st plot is the hardest one to come up with.
Okay. Jane, truly, Monday morning, what are you going to write?
Oh, well, the first thing on Monday morning, I'm going to deal with the last book of the Falls Mysteries, which was delayed because of COVID. And it usually comes out in time for When Words Collide, but this year it's coming out in November. So I'm not writing that. I'm done that. I've left the characters in a fairly good place that I think ties them up nicely. But my current project is a complete departure, and it started with, I want to write about a teenage foster child. And it's got to be a thriller. And I talked to my agent about it and said, can you sell a book with a teenage foster child as the sleuth? And she said, if the voice is right, I can sell it. And I said, okay, I'll send you an outline. And then I figured out a plot that could say what I wanted to say about this character while giving readers some good crime stuff to dig their teeth into.
All right. Well, for me, Monday morning, I'm working on a new book, and it's based on a short story that I wrote in AB Negative, the anthology, in 2015. And it was very much, I don't even know where he came from. An intriguing character. He thinks he's a Sam Spade type private investigator in the year 2015 at that point in time. He's made fun of because he wears a fedora. Joe, if you're listening, I like fedoras too. He has 40s slang and that sort of thing. So this one is different for me because it's very much about this character. And I decided I would turn it into a full-length novel. So I feel like I understand the character. And now I'm kind of searching around and trying to find the right flow for a plot for it. So that was different. Like I said, Crisis Point was definitely, I had an idea to tell a story, found the characters, and this one, I'm doing it differently. So, but that, off of what Brent was saying about how he changed a bit with that story from 20 years ago where it was plot to character, which brought something to mind, and I'd like your thoughts on this, is it, if you start a story and you've got your plot and your character, does it become easier to write your character once you have that character in your head? Once you start to understand that character, or maybe even when that character starts talking to you and telling how things are going, and then it becomes easier to write that character?
I think for me personally, I find it difficult to, I find it easier to dream up an interesting plot and more difficult to really just start generally ruminating on character. So for myself, I would come up with an interesting plot because I've got a brain that just spits out plots constantly for me. And I'll start with the plot, drop some people in it, and then I'll say, okay, who are they? And why are they doing these things and where did they come from and so on. So I would have a lot of trouble, I think. Maybe that's not entirely true. Maybe it's a case-by-case thing. I think I generally find it easier to start with a plot and then look at who this character is who's occupying this plot. That was where it began with End of the Loop, the book that Jane was speaking about. I started with this interesting situation. Here's a person who is in a mental institution, heavily sedated and being watched very carefully, and he's been through so much that his memory is almost completely gone. And it struck me as a really fascinating starting point for struck me as a really good hook for. The whole idea fascinated me, and once I started writing it, then I had to figure out, okay, why is this person here? How did he end up here? What happened, and what made that happen? And then it became a really, really deep exploration of character. But for me, it all began with actually more with situation than plot, but started with situation, which led to plot, which led to me spending 20 years thinking about who this person is.
20 years, that's a long time.
Yeah.
I assure you that was not the plan. That's how it turned out.
But you're right. I think all of us, didn't we start with reading some variant of the Hardy Boys or Nancy Drew or Trixie Belden? Is there a crime writer alive who did not read crime novels as children? That would be an interesting survey.
Mm-hmm.
So what was the question again, Dwayne?
I don't know. I think I lost it now. Is it easier to write your character, once you're farther into the story and now that character is in your head and talking to you? I find the villains talk to me too, so sometimes it gets a little crazy. But
Dwayne, I can definitely speak to this. For all my talking about plot, I can't write until I know my character inside out. Yeah. And I will sometimes have something in my head for 3 months working through it to see if I can become the character. I write mainly in first person when I'm writing novels. To me, the thrill of it is getting inside the skin of the character. And that's what I love to do. That's what I love to read, is again, that sort of a book where I become the character when I'm reading, or I become when I'm writing. So as much as I have to work on plot now a lot, because simply I've used up my base of plots, I can't even start to write until I become that character.
Okay, good. Yeah. Yeah, I'd agree. All right. Any other comments on that idea?
Okay, now I've remembered what I was going to say. You have to
Okay,
forgive me.
perfect.
See, I'm a midnight writer, and this is really early in my morning. So, yeah, I think I find it more exciting to discover my character as I go. And this is not always the case. As Brent was talking about learning, changing as a writer, growing as a writer. When I first started, I was like Melody. I wanted to know everything about my character before I started. I did not want to meet surprises that would interfere with the plot I had planned. And so you can imagine my horror when I reached a part in my very first currently unpublished mystery novel. It was a historical that took me to the long list of the Unhanged Arthur for the first time. But there was a point just near the half where I had put a character into a position, and I'd assumed that the plot would go on around this character, and then I realized there was simply no way I could proceed with that scene with that character in that position. It was simply untrue to the way that she had developed to that point in the story. And I was so horrified by this experience that I didn't work on the book for about 6 months. I couldn't reconcile in my head how to make this character work with this plot, and was I going to have to throw out the entire first half of my first book? And then I realized that, you see, Melody comes from a Sicilian background. There's a lot of hot blood, and you don't bother hiding your emotions. Can I put it that way, Mel?
Yeah, sure.
I come from a reserved British background. My family were the people who quietly sit in their little village, smiling politely at the Women's Institute, and then, grind up belladonna into somebody's tea. So I had to really, and I come back to this over and over again. As an individual, I shy away from overt conflict, arguments, disruption, and anything that is going to cause me to have to feel strong emotions. That is not what you need in a character in a book. You have to be willing to go there. And one of the more difficult for me journeys as an author is moving away from moving my characters around like cardboard cutouts or game pieces on a board, and actually stopping and getting into how they feel and respond to the plot elements around them. So for me, plot has become just a framework around which my characters grow and change and become more themselves, and sometimes surprise me in the process.
Mm-hmm.
All right, we're down to our last 8 minutes or so. So one quick question would be, in your writings, do you have, I guess we would never say we had a favorite plot necessarily, but do you have a favorite character in your writings? Melody?
Yeah, sure. And I'll say plot too, because they came in the same. Yeah, somewhere here I have that book, I think. Yeah, this is probably my favorite of the books, The Goddaughter's Revenge, which was #2 in the series, and it won the Derringer and the Arthur Ellis Award. And in that character, I brought forth Nico, who is Gina Gallo's cousin, and he's a metrosexual in Hamilton. Yeah, I tried to get as crazy as I could, and which is a real lunchbox town, and he's also the mob break and enter artist. And he really wants to be an interior designer. He loves the color pink, but he's not gay. He just loves the color pink. So I think I really got a good character with him. And in fact, I'm told that he kind of has to take over the next books. And so he runs equal with Gina now in the books. So definitely that character, I can't imagine living without him. He's real. He's got to be half an hour down the road here. I can't imagine a world without Nico. Can I add something quickly too? Is something we haven't talked about is the fact that when you're writing successive books in a series, you're most likely writing them on contract, meaning that You've submitted an outline to your publisher. You're already with a publisher, so you're submitting an outline. They're saying, yeah, okay, we'll give you the contract. You're signing the contract before you write a word of the book. So you got to have your plot well done in advance. And that's why when I said, I'm 3 months sometimes ruminating over these things, it's because I got to get the outline down before I even, start, because I won't start till I have the contract, or I'll lose my publisher. So anyway, sorry, I wanted to bring that up because I didn't explain that before. Uh-oh, Dwayne.
We lost Dwayne. So we're just going to carry on talking about him like he's not.
I heard that.
Sure, yeah.
I made it back just in time. I knew that would happen.
You can see his ears are a little red there.
That's right.
What did I say?
Just hurt my feelings so bad. I don't even know what we were talking about. Yeah. All right. So we're down to 5 minutes left. So, Jane, favorite character? Or did you cover that while I was talking?
No, I didn't cover it. And I'm glad you restated the question. I need more coffee or something. My favorite character is the one that I know from the inside out, and that is Jan. She's the secondary sleuth in When the Flood Falls, which was the one that won the Unhanged Arthur. And she has MECFS. She hasn't had it as long as I have. I'm on my 29 years and counting. And she's just in her first 5 years. And I struggled with that because my experience of MECFS is a long and highly convoluted journey that would terrify any normal person. And fortunately, I'm not normal, but I can't tip all of that onto the readers. So I had to scale it back and make her into a beginning person. She's had this illness for 5 years. She has lost her first career. She has almost lost her marriage a couple of times. She has had to choose that she will not likely ever have children. So she's lost a lot before the series starts. And I think in that sense, she and Lacey make a good match, that they both understand. However, Lacey is very physically fit and active. Jan is very much housebound. She hardly can move from her bed to her couch most days, but she can still think and she can still observe. And her great strength is watching the rhythms of her neighborhood. She intimately knows how people move and what's out of place in her neighborhood, which makes her kind of like me, because for years, while I was stuck at home, one of the only people I regularly saw was the next door neighbor's boyfriend, and I really wondered from his look whether he might be a serial killer. Whether one day we were going to wake up to find the police digging up his backyard. And later found out that he's a high school vice principal, which explains an awful lot about how grim he looked when he came home. But no, Jan is my favorite character because she and I share this illness, and we share it with about 20 million people worldwide. 75% of us never have, can never hold a job again, a full-time job. And so I wrote that character, largely for me, but I was very surprised to find that she has a following around the world with all of these people who have been trapped in their homes, not known, not seen, not heard, even by their own doctors. And now they take that book to their doctors and say, read this mystery and you'll understand me better.
Yes. And
so for me, that is like the greatest validation that I could have as a writer, that this book is doing good far beyond what I thought or intended. And this character is doing good far beyond what I thought or intended when I wrote her.
Mm-hmm. Jane, I've just got to say that I was a hospital director, and I didn't fully understand that illness until I read that book.
Well, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
All right, Brent, in 12 to 13 seconds, can you tell us who your favorite character is?
My favorite character is always the last one I wrote, so it turns into just a really shallow answer. I'm going to actually speak to Jennifer from Online for Authors, who posted, do you find your characters evolve within the plot as you're writing? So I'm going to talk about my work in progress briefly, where essentially as the work goes on, I get to know these people better. And so the characters evolve. They do, for me at least, the characters do evolve as I'm writing. And then I have to go back and tinker a little bit with the earlier chapters. So part of it is that the nature of the character changes from who they are at the beginning of the book to who they are at the end because of what happens. The other part is I get to know the character better, or I change who the character is a little bit, and then I go back and tinker with what I wrote earlier so that it's more consistent with who I realize the person is, or who I decide that the person is. So there's both evolution of the character within the story, and then there's evolution of the character within my brain, which leads to tinkering with the story. So I usually, well, it really varies as to how much people evolve as I'm writing, how much they change in either of those two senses. But generally speaking, there's at least some change to the character. Either the character is growing or the character is changing in my head, and then I'm rewriting the character. So I also want to mention, I'm working on a domestic thriller. I think that some of the best mystery writing out there is actually not in the mystery genre. It's in the psychological thriller genre, because it's layers and layers of mystery and secrets, and also really deep explorations of character as well. So I think that some of the best mystery books, Gone Girl is the classic example that somebody mentioned earlier. Is it's not in the mystery genre technically. It's classified more as a thriller, a domestic thriller, or a psychological thriller. But really, you spend the whole book wondering what exactly happened and so on. So some of the best mystery books are not shelved with mysteries.
Okay, that's great. We may have time to chat a little bit longer, but in case we don't, I want to thank Melodie, Brent, and Jane for participating on the panel and the great ideas. And somebody mentioned that they appreciated that you educated as well as talked about this, so that's great. And I also want to thank Joe Compton of Go Indie Now for hosting this panel session, and we really appreciate your help, Joe, and the technology behind it. And I think he's telling me we don't have any more time. So have a wonderful When Words Collide, and hopefully some of us are on another panel in a couple of days, and if not, have a wonderful conference. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you, DWAYNE.
Thank you. Thanks, DWAYNE.